This is chapter 27, section 5, and these notes will be relatively brief because the readings for this week were relatively brief. But we've got hinging the open door in China is the first section, so we're going to talk about the open door note. And then the second section, we will talk about the election of 1900. So we've been talking about the Spanish-American War, obviously, and the Philippines as well. This is kind of transitioning to, I guess, East Asia, Far East Asia, looking at China and Japan. And today we consider China kind of as one of the world's superpowers. But during the late 1800s, it was down. It had just lost a conflict to Japan, and throughout their histories, Japan and China had gone back and forth with each other. And so 1894-95, Japan had just defeated China, and so China was in a weakened state. And so Europe, as they were wont to do, tried to swoop in and take control, colonize, imperialize, whatever term you want to use. And so Europe slices China into what are known as spheres of influence. So not outright colonies, but specific areas where they would control, in large part, economics, trade type things. So, and that's what the next bullet point says, European nations controlled the trade rights in specific cities. Example of that was the British controlled Hong Kong, which, if you know kind of modern day politics, continues to be a dispute amongst two controls within China, whether they're independent or controlled by China. And Hong Kong so despised, and China despised that control that Britain had. The United States, meanwhile, has concerns. It's not because they're concerned about China's well-being, but they're concerned because they're worried that the missionaries who are working in China will lose that market. So they're concerned about that overseas access. And then businesses are worried of losing markets, so losing places to sell goods and also potentially gain resources. And so in steps the Secretary of State, John Hay. And just a reminder, we've talked about him before. He's the one who was Secretary of State, obviously, under McKinley, because McKinley is still in charge at this point. And during the Spanish-American War, he's the one who gave it the nickname the Splendid Little War. But John Hay comes out and declares the open door policy. And what he says is the spheres of influence are going to be, or should be, dropped, and Chinese cities should be open to all nations for business. Again, this isn't the United States asking, this isn't China asking the United States to state this on their behalf. This is just the United States declaring this because it is obviously in their best interest for China to be open, because otherwise Europe will have the ability to shut them out. Europe obviously was not interested in this. And so this leads to conflict within China. And you have what starts as an uprising and becomes known as the Boxer Rebellion, where you have a group of Chinese who rise up to get rid of the foreigners who control their cities. And it ends in the death of 200 foreigners, and then thousands of Chinese Christians are killed. And again, they are targeted because they are viewed as westernized. And ultimately, troops are sent in by Europe and the United States, and they crush the uprising. And as the uprising is put down, the Chinese are forced to pay $333 million in damages. So again, if you kind of look at the logic of all of this, you've got China beaten by Japan, Europe swoops in to take advantage. The United States gets involved because they're not able to take advantage if Europe is. The Chinese don't like any of this, so they rise up, and then it's suppressed, and then the bill for the conflict is handed to the Chinese. The United States has given $24.5 million of this. We quickly realized that this is way more than we needed, and so a fund is set up in the value of $18 million that is designed to provide scholarships for Chinese students in the United States. In your textbook, I think aptly points out that while this might appear generous, it is ultimately another method of westernizing the Chinese by having Chinese students coming to the United States for their education. And then once this has taken place, John Hay issues a second open door note. And the open door policy is reissued, and it is accepted by the European nations and ultimately China. And what it says is China's borders were to be respected, the typo should be, and its cities open to trade for all. So again, it's in the name. The open door would infer that China is open and for business, and that is what it infers. With your activities this week, you are going to look at the actual open door notes, so you'll get to do some primary source analysis with them. So that is the first section of reading. The second section, the notes are very brief, and I do enjoy the textbook will cover every election. I believe this is the first one we've come across, and they're relatively consumable. They're quick and easy, and this one is no different, but I think it does a good job of pointing out the times of transition in the United States. And so with the election of 1900, you've got William Jennings Bryan. We didn't cover the election of 1896, but he ran in 1896 as well. You should have learned about him in 10th grade. He was very much involved in the fight over the gold and silver standard. So if you recognize that name, that is why. And he's also the first political candidate to ever go and actually campaign, like tour the country and campaign. And so he does that again. That's what that first sub-bullet point says. Whereas McKinley does what had traditionally been done at the time. He stays home. We do have a big change, though. McKinley's vice president. There's a push within the Republican Party to have Teddy Roosevelt be McKinley's vice president. And we'll talk a little bit about why that vice president spot. Some people thought it would be a good fit for Roosevelt. And so Roosevelt actually does tour the country as vice president. McKinley wins easily. It's not even close. It's even a larger victory than it was in 1896. And on the next slide, I've actually got a video. It's all about the play, but just to set the stage for it a little bit, it discusses what happened fairly soon after the election in 1900.
In America, prosperity was the pledge. Campaigning for re-election, President William McKinley promised 4 more years of the full dinner pail. The Republicans chose New York Governor Theodore Roosevelt as McKinley's running mate, despite warnings that he might overshadow the president. The Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan, who criticized Republican foreign policy and the acquisition of territories overseas, Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Imperialism was the burning issue. But McKinley believed America had an obligation to civilize the new territories. In the Philippines, that meant war. The Philippine guerrillas, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, were fighting for their independence, first from Spain, now in 1900 from America. The fighting was savage. Many Americans, including Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie, joined the new anti-imperialist league in opposition to the war. The Philippine insurrection would last 3 years and cost more than the war with Spain. 4,000 Americans would die, more than 200,000 Filipinos. Aguinaldo was captured in 1901, and the Philippines were put on the road to independence. Although many Americans didn't support the Philippine insurrection, a vote for McKinley seemed a vote for continued prosperity, and he was re-elected by the largest margin in 30 years. Friendship and understanding between the Americans was the theme of the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. At night, the dramatic and innovative use of electricity produced a dazzling city of lights, drawing power from a generator at nearby Niagara Falls. Visitors could tour the fairgrounds in boats through Venetian canals and visit exhibits of the latest developments in agriculture, forestry, and transportation. The fair's Spanish-style architecture influenced building styles for the rest of the decade. September 5th, 1901 was President's Day at the fair in Buffalo, and 50,000 were on hand to welcome President McKinley and his wife. Moving picture cameramen were also there to record the president's military review. Despite the recent war with Spain and in the Philippines, McKinley was not a warrior, but he was a strong advocate of foreign trade and expansion of the merchant marine. The period of exclusiveness is past, he said. Isolation is no longer possible or desirable. A public reception for the president at the Temple of Music the following day drew a huge crowd. But something was wrong. Word spread quickly. The president had been shot. The assassin was an anarchist named Leon Chalcos. Doctors were unable to remove the bullet, but were optimistic that the president would recover. A week later, McKinley died. After lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, McKinley's body was taken home by train to Canton, Ohio, for burial. The new president, Theodore Roosevelt, called it a terrible blow and reassured many, saying he would continue unbroken McKinley's policies of peace and prosperity with honor. Within 8 weeks, assassin Leon Chalcos would be tried, convicted,